Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. The Deeper Thinking Podcast is produced as an independent, ad-free project. Its episodes are digitally narrated to manage the demands of research and editing, while ensuring each installment is engaging, ethically considered, and attentive to nuance. There are tyrannies that do not wear crowns or raise banners, yet they bind as surely as any visible ruler. They do not declare themselves, for their strength lies in remaining unnoticed, in moving through the habits and expectations of daily life until their presence feels natural. They thrive in the quiet acceptance of familiar arrangements, in the small concessions that seem harmless until they accumulate, in the illusions we choose because they make life easier to bear. Sustained not only by those who benefit from them, but by those who agree, consciously or not, to live within their terms, these unseen powers endure precisely because they are rarely named. What follows is not tied to one place or time. It speaks instead to the recurring patterns by which truth is preserved or buried, morality defended or surrendered, courage awakened or stifled. It examines how systems conceal themselves behind beauty or order, how conscience lingers long after the moment for action has passed, how justice can operate without mercy, and how survival itself can be an act of rebellion. These are not abstract problems. They have accompanied humanity for as long as authority and obedience have existed side by side, for as long as fear and loyalty have competed for our choices. This is not an instruction manual. It is a map drawn from observation, of patterns that emerge, vanish, and return, of moments when the expected script is broken, and of the rare instances when the cycle is altered. Each section seeks to make visible the structures that endure because they remain unexamined. Together, they form the tyranny of the unseen, shaping lives and histories, whether or not those within their reach ever recognize the design. Truth has never depended on applause for its survival. It exists in quiet corners as easily as on grand stages, often enduring more securely when left untouched by the clamour of public approval. When truth is recognised, it risks becoming an ornament paraded for prestige rather than pursued for clarity. In obscurity, however, it remains unshaped by the distortions of fame or ideology. It is the paradox of human history that some of the most enduring truths were ignored in their time, surviving precisely because they were too dangerous or too subtle to be assimilated by the prevailing order. This endurance is not passive. Truth often shelters in unlikely forms, concealed within private thought, whispered conversation, or works that reach only a few. It has a resilience born from adaptability, wearing the guise of parable, irony, or satire when open declaration would invite destruction. Those who serve it may be anonymous by choice or necessity, understanding that the work matters more than their name. In doing so, they deny systems the ability to claim or distort what they have created. Yet survival does not mean stasis. Truth moves quietly through different vessels, sometimes carried by those who love it, sometimes by those who oppose it without realizing they are its messengers. It can persist in fragments hidden in symbols or encoded in acts of resistance so small they escape the notice of power. These forms are not always recognized as moral victories in their time, but they leave the record necessary for later discovery. The path of truth is rarely linear. It is tested by ridicule, suppressed by authority, and undermined by the indifference of the crowd. At times it survives not by overcoming these forces, but by outlasting them. Systems collapse, regimes shift, and in their absence the quiet work emerges intact. This kind of endurance often demands that its stewards accept obscurity, even self-erasure, as the price of preservation. Such a decision is not weakness, but a deliberate calculation that the integrity of the truth is worth more than personal vindication. Paradoxically, the absence of recognition can grant a kind of freedom. Without the demands of an audience, truth can remain unshaped by the expectations of fashion or faction. It becomes a private dialogue between those who understand it, immune to the market of opinion. In this way, its survival is an act of resistance, a refusal to be simplified or appropriated. It waits, patient and whole, for the moment when it may be seen clearly, not because it has changed, but because the world has. Morality is never a fixed possession. It is tested in moments when the cost of action outweighs comfort, and it is compromised most easily not by temptation, but by fear. The fragile edge between courage and cowardice is revealed in the instant someone recognizes what is right yet hesitates to act. This hesitation can be draped in the language of caution, procedure, or propriety, but its essence is retreat. Across ages and systems, moral failure often takes the form of silent consent. It is not always the loud opposition that sustains injustice, but the quiet, respectable absence of resistance. True moral courage is rarely tidy. It resists the neat alignment with ideology or collective cause because it is rooted in the willingness to act from personal conviction, even when no one stands beside you. Such courage can be gentle as well as defiant, expressed in acts that seem small, showing compassion to one the world condemns, refusing to participate in the humiliation of another, or protecting the vulnerable without expectation of reward. These choices may not alter the immediate course of events, but they create a ripple against the current, a pattern that others may one day follow. Moral collapse, by contrast, is often disguised as order. Systems present themselves as guardians of stability, rewarding compliance and masking the erosion of conscience as the maintenance of peace. In such climates, inaction becomes an unspoken currency traded for safety or privilege. This exchange corrodes the individual from within, replacing moral clarity with procedural convenience. Over time, the ability to distinguish between legality and justice fades, and with it, the will to question. The most dangerous moral failures occur in the presence of partial awareness. Those who know the harm being done, but believe their role too small to matter, are often the last link in the chain of oppression. This abdication is not neutral, it is active participation through the gift of one's silence. History remembers such silences, not always with names, but with the consequences they allowed. To sustain morality in such conditions requires not perfection, but persistence. It may mean enduring the loneliness of standing apart, or the uncertainty of acting without assurance of outcome. It demands resilience when others urge retreat, and a willingness to accept the personal cost of conviction. In this sense, morality is less a state than a practice, renewed in each decision to reject the comfortable wrong in favour of the costly right. It is a fragile possession only because it must be constantly chosen, and each choice reveals who we are becoming. Power rarely announces itself in its true form. It prefers masks, moving through soft gestures, controlled appearances, and the subtle shaping of perception. The most effective power is not the one that forces obedience, but the one that makes obedience appear voluntary. It thrives in spectacle, where beauty and refinement distract from the moral decay beneath. This presentation is not ornamental, it is strategic, turning admiration into complicity. The audience, charmed, does not see that they have been enlisted in the work of sustaining the very forces that confine them. The architecture of such power is built on hierarchy, yet its order is often disguised as civility. Rules and etiquette, even when elaborate, do not always protect dignity. They can just as easily serve as instruments of control, regulating the flow of access and favour. The brilliance of this system lies in its ability to make subordination feel like participation, to replace the language of domination with the language of inclusion. Direct force has its limits. Spectacle and persuasion reach further, securing allegiance where coercion would breed resistance. When power wears beauty, it disarms the instinct to question. The polished surface invites fascination, creating a bond between ruler and ruled that does not rely on trust, only on the shared enjoyment of the display. Yet beneath the elegance, transactions remain. Every act of generosity, every public gesture, is calculated to reinforce the structure that made such giving possible. In this dynamic, truth is not so much denied as curated. Power shapes what is seen and leaves the rest in shadow, offering selective revelations to guide thought without appearing to dictate it. This is control without the burden of visible tyranny, an arrangement in which people willingly adopt the language and values of the system because they believe they have chosen them. The mask is most effective when it reflects back the desires of those it governs. People will protect what they believe affirms them, even if the affirmation is carefully engineered. This mutual performance, where the ruled play the role of willing participants, makes resistance difficult to imagine, let alone enact. The stability it produces is illusory, dependent on constant performance from both sides. Yet such power is never complete. Its reliance on perception makes it vulnerable to the unpredictable. Those moments when the mask slips, when the spectacle fails to distract, when beauty no longer conceals the bargain it represents. In these rare fractures, the truth of the arrangement becomes visible, and the choice to continue playing along is revealed for what it always was, a choice, not a necessity. Change does not always arrive from external forces. It often begins in the private decision to step beyond what is permitted. Agency is not simply the capacity to choose, but the willingness to act on those choices, especially when doing so carries risk. The transformation of a life can begin in a single moment of refusal or an embrace of what was once feared. Such acts rarely emerge fully formed. They are prepared in silence in the accumulation of discontent, until the threshold is crossed and the person becomes someone different in the act of deciding. True transformation often resists the neat categories that systems impose. It is not a shift from weakness to strength or from ignorance to knowledge, but a redefinition of what matters enough to fight for. Sometimes the catalyst is deeply personal. The desire to protect another, the need to reclaim dignity, the refusal to accept humiliation as normal. These motivations may appear apolitical, yet they carry the potential to disrupt entrenched arrangements. When a life is reoriented around such convictions, the system that shaped it is forced to adapt or reveal its own fragility. Agency is strongest when it does not depend on permission. The willingness to step outside the lines of what is sanctioned marks a break from the illusion that the boundaries were natural or necessary. Transformation in this sense is not given, it is taken, and because it is self-claimed, it resists being undone, even if the new course leads into uncertainty or isolation. The world often reacts to such change with a mix of fascination and suspicion. Transformation disrupts predictability, and systems depend on predictability to function. When someone acts outside their assigned role, it exposes the fact that those roles are constructs, not inevitabilities. This recognition is dangerous, for it invites others to imagine their own departures. Agency is not always dramatic. It can be quiet, even invisible to those around it. A refusal to comply, a decision to assist without seeking credit, a choice to preserve rather than destroy, all can be acts of transformation when they alter the course of what might have been. Such acts gain their strength not from scale, but from the clarity of intention behind them. What makes transformation lasting is the alignment between inner conviction and outward action. It is not enough to see differently, one must also live differently, even when the cost is high. In this way, agency becomes the art of shaping one's own life in defiance of forces that would prefer it remain unshaped, and transformation becomes the visible proof that such shaping is possible. Conscience is the weight that remains when the moment for action has passed. It cannot be dismissed by time or silenced by distraction, for it is the echo of what was known and not done. This burden does not fade in the absence of witnesses. It is most persistent in solitude, where no audience can soften its presence. The knowledge that one could have acted differently is a sharper punishment than any imposed from outside, for it cannot be negotiated away. It is both the judge and the sentence. Guilt born of inaction is different from regret over a failed attempt. Failure carries the dignity of having tried, of having tested one's will against the shape of the world. Inaction, by contrast, leaves an open wound. The unaltered reality stands as proof of one's absence from the field. This absence can be masked with justifications, procedure, safety, the belief that one's role was too small to matter. But these are temporary shelters. The truth of the choice, once seen, does not leave. Systems often depend on this paralysis. They cultivate a habit of deferral, rewarding those who follow procedure rather than those who question it. In this climate, hesitation becomes a virtue and the avoidance of responsibility is reframed as discipline. This reframing erodes the individual's ability to distinguish between lawful order and moral order until the two are assumed to be the same. When the moment comes that demands conscience over compliance, many find they have forgotten how to choose. Conscience does not allow such forgetting. It returns in cycles, bringing the same questions back for consideration. The repetition is part of the sentence, forcing the individual to live again and again with the moment they abandoned. This is why some punishments are eternal, not because they are imposed from above, but because the self is unable to grant absolution. The more deeply the choice violated one's own sense of justice, the longer this loop endures. The weight of conscience is also a map. It points to the places where one's values and one's actions have diverged, revealing the cost of that separation. To follow such a map requires courage, for it may lead to admissions that undo the identity carefully maintained. Yet to ignore it is to accept the slow erosion of integrity. In the end, conscience offers no escape from the truth of what was done or left undone. It offers only the choice between living with the weight or confronting it directly, with whatever consequences that confrontation demands. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear dictate the terms of action. It thrives in unpredictability, where outcomes cannot be guaranteed and the familiar structures offer no protection. In such conditions, courage becomes an act of disruption, breaking the pattern that power and habit depend upon. It is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it moves quietly, undermining what seemed unshakable with a gesture so simple it escapes notice until it has already altered the course. The most enduring courage often comes from unexpected sources. It is not exclusive to those trained for conflict or those who seek public recognition. It can emerge from love, from loyalty, from the quiet determination to protect what matters most. When courage is rooted in such personal convictions, it resists co-optation by ideology. It does not need the language of a cause to justify itself, and thus remains immune to the compromises that causes often demand. Systems are unsettled by courage precisely because it cannot be fully predicted. Order depends on stability, and stability depends on the assumption that people will act according to established expectations. A single deviation can reveal that the rules are not laws of nature, but agreements maintained by compliance. Once this is seen, the possibility of change becomes real, and others may begin to imagine their own acts of defiance. Courage does not always win. Acts of bravery may fail to change outcomes, may be punished, or may vanish without public acknowledgement. Yet even in apparent failure, they alter the moral landscape. They leave a record that such action was possible, that fear was not the final authority. This record can inspire others long after the original act has been forgotten by those in power. The resilience of courage lies in its adaptability. It can take the form of open resistance or quiet endurance, confrontation or evasion. In repressive conditions, it may survive in humour, in art, in the subtle refusal to repeat the official language. What matters is not the scale of the act, but the integrity of the choice behind it. In the end, courage is a conversation between the self and its own limits. It asks whether the preservation of safety is worth the erosion of self-respect, whether silence is worth the price of consent. Each time the answer is no, something changes, not just in the individual, but in the fabric of the world they inhabit. Even if the change is invisible at first, the pattern of what is possible has shifted, and that shift is permanent. Justice does not always align with morality. There are forms of justice that operate without compassion, delivering consequences that are precise yet indifferent to the human cost. Such justice is concerned less with the restoration of balance than with the enforcement of order, and it may punish the guilty and the innocent alike if the rules demand it. The danger lies in mistaking this for moral righteousness, for the two are not the same. Morality weighs intention and circumstance. Justice, in its colder form, measures only adherence or violation. This separation is most visible when justice emerges from systems rather than individuals. Systems value consistency over empathy, preferring outcomes that can be repeated and predicted. In doing so, they risk becoming blind to the very truths they claim to uphold. A law applied equally to all can still be unjust if it ignores the realities that shape each case. Yet, systems by design find comfort in the removal of nuance, for nuance disrupts efficiency. There is also a justice that comes not from institutions but from the unfolding of events, a kind of consequence woven into the structure of reality. It does not ask for permission, nor does it wait for courts or decrees. This justice is often delayed, arriving long after the harm was done, yet when it comes it feels inevitable. Those who built their safety on deception may find themselves undone by the very structures they manipulated. Those who avoided moral choices may discover they have trapped themselves in the repetition of that avoidance. In such a world, justice may appear arbitrary because it does not conform to human timelines or expectations. Its arrival can be merciful or merciless, rewarding acts of courage as easily as it exposes acts of cowardice. It is neither sentimental nor cruel. It is simply the return of consequences that were set in motion long before they were recognized. To live with an awareness of this kind of justice is to accept that not all wrongs will be punished swiftly, nor all good acts rewarded visibly. It requires a faith in the unseen accumulation of cause and effect, in the idea that every choice leaves a trace that shapes what comes next. This does not excuse inaction. On the contrary, it deepens the responsibility to act, knowing that the justice of events is impartial and that its verdict may arrive when the opportunity to change it has long passed. In this sense, justice is less a comfort than a reminder. The truth of our choices will meet us again, whether or not we are ready. Survival is often mistaken for passivity, yet it can be the most deliberate form of resistance. To remain intact in the face of forces designed to erase or consume is to refuse them the victory they seek. Sometimes this means vanishing from the spaces where conflict is visible, withdrawing not out of surrender, but as a way to preserve the self for a future moment. Disappearance can be a strategy, denying the system the satisfaction of destruction or assimilation. Endurance requires a different kind of courage than confrontation. It accepts that not all battles can be fought openly, and that some must be deferred to preserve the ability to fight at all. In such moments, survival becomes the quiet art of navigating without being captured, of continuing to exist without giving away what cannot be replaced. This is not evasion in the sense of cowardice, but an acknowledgement of reality's demands, a recognition that martyrdom is not always the most effective form of defiance. The refusal to participate can carry its own weight of defiance. To withhold one's presence, one's voice, or one's work from a system that thrives on visibility is to starve it of a resource it values. This absence can be difficult to read from the outside. It may be mistaken for defeat. Yet over time it leaves a gap that cannot be filled, like a reminder that some things remain beyond reach. In this way, survival denies total victory to the forces that seek dominance. Survival also demands adaptability. It shifts shape when necessary, concealing what is essential and presenting what is safe to reveal. It may take the form of humour in oppressive spaces or the careful maintenance of private truths in public silence. The capacity to adapt does not mean the abandonment of principle. It means finding the form that principle can safely take in a hostile environment. In certain conditions, the mere act of continuing to live according to one's values is an act of rebellion. It resists the erosion of selfhood, refusing to be remade in the image of the oppressor. Even in obscurity, this survival matters. It carries forward the possibility of another way of being, waiting for the moment when the climate changes enough for it to be shared openly. Thus, survival is not the opposite of resistance, but one of its purest forms. It preserves what would otherwise be lost, ensuring that when the time comes to act more openly, there is still something intact to bring into the light. In this sense, survival is not an end in itself, but a bridge to the next beginning. History does not move in a straight line. It bends, loops, and often repeats itself with only slight variations in form. Patterns of power, moral failure, and human resilience reappear across centuries, wearing different costumes but following familiar scripts. The belief that each generation is uniquely immune to the errors of the past is itself one of history's most enduring illusions. Change occurs, but the underlying forces that shape human behaviour, fear, ambition, loyalty, and the hunger for meaning, remain constant, ensuring that certain dramas are staged again and again. The repetition is not always exact. Events return altered by context, and the players are never the same, yet the structure is recognisable. Authority still masks itself in civility, justice still struggles with partiality, and courage still emerges from unlikely places. The costumes shift, laws, technology, language, but the core dynamics endure. This persistence can feel like inevitability, as if human nature is bound to its cycles. Yet within these patterns lies the possibility of disruption. Disruption occurs when the script is broken, when an expected response is replaced by something unpredictable. A silence where there should have been consent, an act of mercy in place of vengeance, a refusal to enforce the rules that maintain injustice. Such moments create fractures in the cycle. They do not end history's repetition, but they alter its trajectory, leaving a new thread for others to follow. Over time, enough of these threads can reweave the pattern. The danger is that most disruptions are absorbed or forgotten if they are not sustained. Power learns to accommodate small shifts, integrating them into the existing order to preserve its continuity. History shows that the most lasting changes are those that combine immediate acts with long-term preservation, ensuring that the memory of what was possible remains accessible to those who will face the cycle again. To live with an awareness of these cycles is to see both the weight and the freedom in human history. The weight lies in knowing that certain struggles will never vanish entirely. The freedom lies in recognizing that within each repetition is the opportunity to choose differently. This awareness invites humility. We are not the first to face these questions, and responsibility for our choices will either reinforce the old patterns or help carve the space for something new. In the end, history is not a closed loop, but a spiral. We return to familiar points, but never exactly as we were. Each turn carries the residue of what came before and the potential for what might come next. The shape we give to that turn is our inheritance and our gift to those who will meet it after us.